Hi, welcome to Poemalogues. My name is Dasha Kelly Hamilton. I'm going to be your host as your poet laureate for the city of Milwaukee and for the state of Wisconsin. And Poemalogues is an opportunity for, I'll be honest, for me to hang out with some of my favorite incredible friends and to make some new friends by falling into these organic, unscripted conversations that start at one idea and end with a poem. Now, let me be clear. Poemalogues is heavy on the conversation, light on the poem. A poem is a way to get us there, kind of like life, but we'll get to that later. And in fact, the poem that I was able to find speaks a lot to the life that we're all living right now. So the conversation we're having today is about justice. And I think about justice with a big J and justice with a small j, and I'll share the poem that I found at the end. But first, I'm excited to introduce to you Miss Erica Conway, and we're going to hear what she has to say about justice, and we'll hear a little bit more about her life, her story, and then a poem that she found. Miss Erica, how are you today?
I am well, thank you. I'm even better because I get to talk to you.
We do this so well. We do this so well. Just kind of sitting back and letting all the things fall out of our brain and cleaning up what needs to be cleaned up afterwards. So I certainly appreciate being able to have those moments with you. So tell us a little bit. So tell the good people who you are, where you're from, what you're about. What is your whole life story?
All right. So I was adopted when I was 2 years old, and this set a course for me. I have a fabulous family that I was adopted into. I love them tremendously, and they are wonderful. But one of that little thing about being adopted when you're two made me quite a people pleaser. I apparently mentally, as a 2-year-old, was like, I have to figure out how to make these people love me so I don't have to go to a new family. And so I am super people-rific. Like all my focus is on people. And so I spent my undergraduate in leadership in the residence halls. I went to grad school. I got a job as a graduate student assistant in the residence halls. And finally, I was professionally in residence halls across the country, Michigan State University, Eastern Washington University, and Indiana State University. And then I came back to my home state of Wisconsin. I grew up in Mukwonago, but I settled back in Milwaukee and found myself with more people at my business called C2, which is I've done for 17 years. And last year I launched a startup, and I tapped the beautiful Miss Dasha to give us some guidance as we began the journey. Because one of the things about people is that not everybody has the same access, not everybody has the same opportunity, and that injustice does not work for me. And I have a pedestal and a platform and a voice and a couple businesses where I can make a difference. And so that's how I'm spending my days today.
Thank you. And my goodness, especially these days that we are all sorting through, swimming through, fighting through, depending on the day.
Yeah.
So having someone who has that as the forefront of your mission in front of your, or maybe alongside all of your other work is commendable, admirable. And as someone on the other end of that gun spear injustice, I certainly appreciate you making that part of your existence. So many folks we know feel that they're outside of this conversation. Before I get into wondering how you found comfort in that role, I want to go back to something you said about being a person, a people pleaser, being centered in that. I kind of relate, right? I kind of relate. And we're not alone in relating to that. Talk a little bit about how you came to embrace that. And it sounds like you've learned how to manage it as opposed to that being an Achilles heel that completely unravels your, because we all know a people pleaser, right? And that's really, and that's in the drive ends there, right? So talk a little bit more, how did you manage that and not be something that eat you up?
Well, it did eat me up for quite a long time. And where I really made a breakthrough was I was in a relationship where I was really compromising a lot of my own, what I wanted, because I wanted to be in the relationship. And it really hurt my health. It hurt my mental health. So I started seeing a therapist, and I did a little background on my biological family, and I learned some things about my own mental health. But I really got to kind of say to 2 and 3-year-old Erica, like, you don't have to worry about people leaving you. You can't control it.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't control anyone. You can only control yourself and how you react to things. And if you want something that you're not getting, would you give that to 3-year-old Erica? And I was like, I would. And so when I find myself thinking, like, would I protect 3-year-old Erica from whatever toxicity or weirdness is in my life? I'm like, oh yeah, then I should probably, protect 40 or 50-year-old Erica from that too. So that has been kind of a lifelong journey, but it took, it was a great relationship. It was a great roommateness, but we didn't need to be married. So it took kind of pulling out of that to find my comfort in myself.
And when do you, and this is going to be a masterclass and again, you are not alone. You said all of the words that I know I've personally experienced. We're like, well, I just wanna, and we're supposed to be, and this works, but it doesn't feel good, which means it doesn't work. But as people who are often focused on the other person, you push down what you know, what you feel, these instincts, because they're inconvenient, or it's going to make things, there won't be harmony, or I can be the bigger person. And you're talking about this relationship, I had one of those as well, where it was like, well, he's not capable of, or this is my superhero strength. Like someone who says they don't need a lot of sleep. And maybe there are people who can function with minimal sleep. Everyone needs respect and regard though, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It is a hard lesson to learn. And it's a hard lesson to continue to learn, because I have a therapist. She's brilliant. I love her. Cindy Clark, if anybody's looking for somebody, she says, something that I say in my head all the time. I'll be like, it's easier if. No, it's familiar, but it's definitely not easier.
Say that again.
When you in your head say, it's easier if I just go along with this. It's easier if I just let him win. It's easier if I just don't fight for what I want. She will say, is it? Is it easier? Or is it familiar?
Right. Convenient.
Right.
And inconvenient for whom?
And that's what she would say, like, it's not easier, and it certainly isn't convenient for you. Why is that okay? And then she does would you let your 3-year-old self, would you want her to compromise? And then I'm like, oh, no. Okay, I got it. So, wow. Yeah.
I like that idea of centering those younger versions of ourselves, like imagine in an imaginary space, putting it in your forefront, and so then you're working for that.
You're advocating,
and that's for you. Mm-hmm. I really like that. And what strikes me is I've had a parallel conversation with younger versions of me, and it was more of, I'm so sorry.
Oh,
little smaller version of me that I didn't protect you from, so more of an atonement to those earlier versions. But the idea of bringing those versions with me, kind of like you keep that with those diet tools, you put those things in the refrigerator to remind you of goals. I like that, having those versions of those older versions as part of your right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So speaking of being uncomfortable, tell me about standing in these crossroads in these times we're in. So I can only imagine.
I have spent the last year, I can't even imagine that. I am lucky. I am privileged. I am white, but I've spent the last year furious, angry, frustrated, sad. Like, I can't protect anybody from this world megaphone of hatred and lies. Oh, it's been, so I celebrated on January 20th. I cried, I reveled, I watched every video. I watched the parade across America, the digital one. I saw Milwaukee featured twice. We saw the Hone, we saw Bango, and then it was the united colors of the United States. It was what I like what I expect of my government.
Yeah.
Finally, so I have poured all my energy into, when you and I started talking about Telemer in late December of last year, we talked about building an ecosystem to support individual freelancers, to do so with an eye on inclusion, to be able to, take underrepresented tech freelancers and help them have access to jobs and help them better represent and voice their full value.
Mm-hmm.
All that this pandemic has done is elevate the kind of disparity that freelancers face trying to run their own small businesses. Then the murder of George Floyd just exploded the conversation about institutional barriers, institutional racism, and actually it freed up my team and really galvanized them to be able to say, like, we need to tell a really candid story about the baloney going on in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And then pair that with the political environment, all of those things have really pushed us to say, like, the universe has made it clear this is important work. And while it is not like, we are serving already a pretty privileged group of folks, tech freelancers, it's still work that I know I can do well, and it's where I am. And it's the sphere of influence I have. So I just saw this great thing about salt. Right now we put salt in the snow, and it like melts like a little area around it. And if you have many grains of salt, then all of the things around it get melted. And so if you are this advocate, an anti-racist or advocate, ally, whoever you are this grain of salt. And you spread. And so the more of you there are, the more we spread these kind of environments where we rid ourselves or hopefully break down some of the systemic barriers that have been in people's way for decades, for eons. And so I'm all about this being this grain of sand, doing what I can and the influence I have, and then just gravitating towards other grains of salt.
My goodness. And those other grains of salt, I'm curious to know two things. One, where was how did your saltiness show up before these times, right? So George Floyd, sadly, is not the first Black man murdered in the streets by police, and all the other injustices for all the other groups of folks. So one, how did you come to that? And then now that you're in this salt movement, there are folks who care not to become salt grains that you may have had other relationships with. So how has that transition, that journey been from?
Sure. Well, I feel like there's snow, and when I am around, they just melt away. So people who are in disagreement that other people have this whole pull themselves up by the bootstraps baloney that's less than, I would say, not only empathetic, but just not seeing the full picture of what racism has done in this country. So I'll back up. I'm going to answer your question, then I'm going to get back to melting things away. This work for me has shown up. I've owned C2 for 17 years. And when I got to Milwaukee, I was learning about the creative industry, and on a national scale, there have been challenges with getting access to and people having an inclusive experience in the advertising, graphic design, and marketing world, which is where I've spent the last almost 20 years of my career. So I got involved in Milwaukee in efforts to increase that access, increase diversity, equity, and inclusion in the creative industry in Milwaukee. And in doing so, I met with Ken Hansen and the team at Hansen Dodge, and they are the people who started Greater Together. And they put out the booklet with all the number ones that were the most shameful number ones to ever be printed in a booklet. Like, we were number one for Black male incarceration in the country. We're the number one most segregated city. And so the Greater Together campaign, I was on that board. There was James Hall was one of our board members, and he at the time was the president of the NAACP. So I got to talk to him and have access to all of that kind of rich Milwaukee history about where the challenges are with dismantling segregation in the city. And so I got a bigger context than just the creative industry with that. And so now that Greater Together has this 2030 equity challenge where they're saying we're going to increase the number of creative workers in Milwaukee until by 2030, there'll be 1,600 more workers, creative workers in the city, knowing that that means we have to be targeting grade school and middle school and high school and college level people who might not even know about the industry and what the options are. So that is how I've been showing up in this work. And as for the people who don't believe, so in doing any of this kind of work where you're saying we're trying to increase access, increase diversity, equity, inclusion of those people who are already in our industry, you get the people who are saying like, well, I want to hire, I just am the most qualified person. And being able to say, okay, I need you to understand how systemic racism has impacted who's in the pool of most qualified, and using the analogies of like, okay, both people are starting the race, but one has to jump over an alligator pit and they have to use a swinging rope to get around a flaming, basket of tires or whatever the thing is, like, and the other guy is just going to run. So yeah, they might be both, right? I am using these analogies to kind of help people understand the challenges. I feel like that is where the advantage of this national reckoning for racial justice and social justice has brought us, because there was a lot of work in that conversation, and people are really mired in just who they are. So my great boldness didn't have as much influence as it has now, because now I don't have to convince people that that institutionalized racism exists or that barriers exist. They now, even begrudgingly, accept that barriers exist.
Even begrudgingly is still happening?
Yeah, well, yeah, there's not everybody is smart. I don't know.
Maybe that's it.
Or not everybody is
still saying bootstraps to you.
Right.
If anyone is still saying bootstraps at all, in my opinion, that is a willful ignorance.
It is.
You have too much information. Like you said, there's too much that's
right.
It's always been clear.
Evidence. There's always been evidence. Always. And so now my grain of saltness, I'm just a bigger grain. Like I'm just pushing and pushing and pushing. And I also I'm far less tolerant. Like there's some parallels to this journey of like self-care and taking care of America. I'm not exposing her to racist idiots.
Yeah.
Like, and I don't mean to say it like that, but there are some conversations that are not going to solve these challenges. I'm going to spend my time with the people who are ready to take action on where they are in their journey. If they're like, oh, that is a problem, how can I help? You're my people. I dub you a grain of salt. Come with me on this journey.
I dub you a grain of salt. And that I think that will be helpful. I saw a post just recently and it was saying, okay, yeah, thank you for your reading list about anti-racism. We need y'all to do something. So we don't need any more study. We don't need any more exploration. But like you said, you meet people where they are. So what advice would you give, or what are some things that you've seen or that you've experienced yourself, for the people like, I feel this thing, I now have my eyes open and I still don't know what to do. I still don't know what to do.
So first of all, Dasha Kelly can be helpful. So you can send people to Dasha's website, or you can send them to her NPR appearance where they're talking about implicit bias. I just went to a 3-day session that was hosted by Deanna Singh. She did a 3-day How to Be an Ally session and gave out this book reading thing. But for those who don't want to read books, you can go to sessions like that. And this, there is a woman in Milwaukee whose name is escaping me, and I'm going to get it because it's important that I'm stealing her grain of salt, and I need to give her credit for that. So I want to do that, and I want to find.
You're not stealing, you're sharing.
I'm sharing, but I need to celebrate her.
Yes.
So I can make sure that she gets credit where credit is due.
Definitely. So while you're pulling that up, in the same conversation, I was sitting in on a stream discussion with these two sisters talking, and they were talking about, the phrase was credit the spark. And the bigger discussion was, as Black women, we're in so many rooms, we're standing behind so many people and organizations, and often not getting our due. And not that it's about due, it's about getting the work done. So it was a bigger reality of, just by ratio and math and numbers, the number of professional, engaged, organizing Black women were everywhere, but you don't hear all these Black women's names. Another show for another day.
Yeah.
And individually, the host was describing, she's adopted a habit to credit the spark. And for her, she said, for example, if we have a conversation, Erica, and then I go off and I write a thing, this conversation will make me think of a thing that I'll go and write. Now, you didn't give me the idea. The thing you said wasn't even what was in my head, but this conversation made that happen. So even though we might be talking about biscuits and I go write something about boats, I'm going to say this started with a conversation about biscuits with Erica Conway. So I'm crediting the spark.
Oh, I love it.
So you are crediting the spark.
Oh,
and I want to adopt that as well. I love that.
I love that too. So I'm going to credit Dr. Shalini Nag, N-A-G, from Evita Solve, E-V-I-D-A Solve. And she's doing a 3-day workshop where it's like she did it on Wednesday and then a day in March and a day in April. And it's another kind of exploratory bias, and then how to be an ally, but going a little deeper because she does a ton of workplace work. So, I have just been trying to consume as much of that. And so crediting the spark sounds fantastic, which is why it's important for me to find her.
And we all do that. We make it work. Yeah. So, and on the other end of this, Erica, what else do you feed your soul? This is heavy work and it's incessant. So how do you give yourself that balance?
I work with amazing people. I'm on 2 teams with Talmer and C2, and then all of the talent and freelancers I get to interview, and everyone has. So one of the things, we have this cake and frosting, and you know about this because you're also a fan of cake as a metaphor. Mm-hmm. So cake and frosting framework that we use with C2 and Talmer, where we're saying skills.
Explain it, yeah.
Yeah, skills are the cake. So if you show up and you're a lawyer, well, you got to be able to lawyer, right? You have to know all the things that it takes to get your JD and do the work, and then you have to have specialty. But that's all cake. That is cake. How you show up in the world, that is your frosting, your aspirations, your accomplishments, your character, your passion, and then skills that are outside. They might make carrot cake. They might make a really rich, complex cake, or they might be part of your frosting. And so I love having those conversations. They feed my soul, because when you look at somebody's resume and it's chronological and it's boring and you're like, yeah, but how did you kick ass at work? How did you make it? Because you were in the seat. How was that project different? And when people get to tell that story, it just changes the conversation. They light up, they're excited. They're like, well, if I hadn't been there, the printer wouldn't have done anything on time because I have the relationship and I begged them, and they had a crew go second shift. I'm like, tell that story. You can't put a price on that. That's amazing. So there are always examples of how people go above and beyond, and they don't think that it's special because they don't have a context, because they're doing their thing. That's just how they show up in the world. And so once I can say contextually, no, that has a ton of value, they go, oh, and they begin to okay. Plus, we're all too Midwest modest. If you're unemployed right now and you're looking for a job, drop the Midwest modesty. Make sure you are selling and saying loudly at the top of your voice, this is where I add value, top line value, bottom line value. Figure out your frosting and be unapologetic about it, because the difference between you and somebody else who can do your job is you.
I love that language. It's something that we know, but you're right. We've been coached to do the resume this way, and this is how you represent yourself. And don't be too, because it might, no, I am the bomb and .com, and this is why. And also reminding people, it's similar to what we share with high school store, what I have shared with high school students as they apply, I'm like, listen, I know your application is amazing. Guess what? There are going to be 5,000 other amazing applications. And guess what? They all were class president. They also were on the tennis team. They did volunteer. So what about you?
Right.
So what about you? Okay.
So,
what is interesting?
Yeah. So hearing that from people and getting them there so that they're like, yeah, I am a better candidate. Like that feeds my soul all day.
And I know because you work with people who are already established in their work. So it's one thing to see a high school student light up with what, me? But to see somebody in their 40s and 50s, what, me? It's still in there, y'all. It's still in. Being surprised at how great we already are and given the tools to go out and get recompense for said greatness. We like that.
Yeah.
So we've already been in justice, but I'm curious with this prompt of scouting a poem, where did you start? What was the first thing that came to your mind? Where'd you start?
So I started with the worst stock photography of a diverse group of people, diverse in age, race, religion, sitting around a conference table in a really modern office building. And so that picture always, that stock photography you see on everybody's website, and it's always awful. It's always seemed disingenuous and horrible. But I thought, that's what we're going to build. Like, that's what I'm building towards, is that's real. And that those people really know each other, and they might not like each other, but they love working together. You know what I mean? Like that it's that we can make that real. Mm-hmm. And so for me, that justice is taking what I'm trying to do and apply it to the workspaces that I get to influence.
I'm laughing because I have definitely been at both of those conference tables where we're all like, can't wait to get out of here. Oh, sure. Yes. And where we're not necessarily all best friends, but we definitely have this vibe, and we get to show up as ourselves, whoever ourselves are at this table. I've been at both of them. I mean, the work still gets done, but man, table B, we get the work done and then some. And then some.
Right.
Well, go ahead.
Yeah. I was just going to say, there is research and there is bottom line impact, top line impact to teams who come from different places, spaces, perspectives, that just amplifies the output. And so even if you're uncomfortable, we'll get comfortable with it because it's going to make you more money.
It's when we have to bring it down to that bottom line, but if that's what it takes, people get comfortable. So it's going to bring you more money.
Right. Let's start there, and altruism and community, we can layer that in later.
Yeah, we'll get that. Well, before I have you share the poem, is there anything that you're excited about that you want to share, or any good word for the good people?
Sure. Well, there are a ton of activities going on in Milwaukee and nationally that are fun to take advantage of. But I want you to take advantage of going to talmer.com and looking. And if you know anyone in the world who is looking for tech projects or full-time gigs, we have a bunch listed there. And if you are in the creative industry, or know anybody who is in the creative industry who is also looking for work projects, you can go to c2staffing.com. And those are the places where I have as my salt, am spreading the good work and can help you with cake and frosting and putting a framework to all your awesome.
Oh man, I'm glad that you're in that work. As a creative who has submit to traditional types of agencies, Black woman, set that over here, clear conversation. But also as a creative, if we not working with people who can appreciate how creatives work and what as a writer and a PR person that I'm capable of doing, or a graphic designer. So I just know personally working in this field, how important it is to have an advocate who not just gets you, but gets the scope of how we function. So I definitely know I'm not alone in being glad that there's an agency like this that's not a global app-based service that's going to just downgrade what I get paid in the end. So the creatives, we always get overlooked. They always forget us until the very end. So
we're going to put freelancers first with Tailmer, and eventually creatives will get served by that platform once we're ready and out of phase kind of one.
Mm-hmm. Most excellent.
Yeah, thank you, Dasha. This has been great.
No, I appreciate you. Let's hear your poem.
Okay, let me pull it up. All right. So it's called Transformational Leadership, a poem. Okay. And I was fascinated by that title because that's super corporate, right?
Who's it by?
The author is Andrew J. Hughes.
Okay.
He's a doctoral student in the Department of Sociology's Administration and Leadership Studies at Gettysburg College, or he was when this poem was published. What does it mean to transform or be transformed? Is it to be part of a revolution, an upheaval of the way things were, to form a foundation upon which to build new ways of knowing, being, and doing? Perhaps a revolution like the birth of America, a revolt that became a revolution in the pursuit of life, true liberty, and the promised opportunity to pursue happiness. Yes, as the name implies, a revolution is a cycle which will always lead us to the same state we've known before. So what does it mean to transform? Is it a metamorphosis, a process of fundamental change in form, condition, or nature, to morph from one state to another, like a hairy, slow, hungry, but cute caterpillar, into a beauty full of color and flight and hope? But can we honestly believe that we as humans can recreate something so perfect? So maybe transformation means something more simple or surface level, like an alliteration or a difference in appearance or something or someone, like tailoring of a new suit or the making up of one's face. Yet that type of change rarely lasts, as cosmetics wash away and suits become worn. So what does it really mean to transform or be transformed? Fundamentally, transformation is about change, not change apart or change from one thing to another, but change together and change with one another, like a loving couple growing old together. As the great transforming leadership theorist James McGregor Burns pioneered, transformational leadership occurs when one or more persons engage with others in such a way that leaders and followers raise one another to higher levels of motivation and morality. Transformational leadership ultimately becomes moral in that it raises the level of human conduct and ethical aspiration of both leaders and led, and thus it has a transforming effect on both. Transformational is a shared endeavor, and as leaders, we must aspire to transform ourselves, each other, our workplaces, and our communities together.
Transformation is a shared endeavor. That's like your salt analogy. You're not clearing that driveway with just you.
Right.
It's as super strong as you are as a grain of defrosting salt. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Thank you for making time for this conversation today.
No, thank you. I actually love this poem even more now reading it again.
Something out loud.
There's a whole book
about hearing it out loud.
I know.
Mm-hmm. Most excellent. Thank you. So we have been talking about justice in today's Poemalogue. And I love what Erica said, that transformation is a shared endeavor. And we talked a lot about not necessarily knowing where to start. And so that's where I started in searching for my poem for today with justice, big J justice and small J justice. That small J being us, right? The small J being that question of how do we get started? And we look up at that big J justice and you think, me and my little life, how am I going to affect that change? Well, the poem that I found, not even on purpose, but just the way the world works, by Mother Teresa, I think we have some good guidelines here. So, and this poem is Do It Anyway. People are often unreasonable, illogical, and self-centered. Forgive them anyway. If you are kind, people may accuse you of selfish, ulterior motives. Be kind anyway. If you are successful, you will win some false friends and some true enemies. Succeed anyway. If you are honest and frank, people may cheat you. Be honest and frank anyway. What you spend years building, someone could destroy overnight. Build anyway. If you find serenity and happiness, they may be jealous. Be happy anyway. The good you do today, people will often forget tomorrow. Do good anyway. Give the world the best you have, and it may never be enough. Give the world the best you've got anyway. You see, in the final analysis, it's between you and God. It was never between you and them anyway. Just be you anyway. Scratch that. Be the best version of you every time. Thank you for being here for Poemalogues. We'll see you again here next week. Be incredible.